are the latest of several teams that are opting out of in-person voluntary workouts this spring, and more expected to follow. Threat of COVID and the players' protection are some of the reasons for the decisions. NFL Players Association has been advising players to boycott, opting to work virtually instead like they did last year. Got to bring in another Acho, because one's not good enough. For this one, former linebacker and Players Union rep Sam Acho joins us. But to this Acho, my dog, is this a smart move by the players?
Fellas, I don't think it is. And I'm all for players' empowerment. I am. Obviously, I was a former player. But sometimes you got to remember, like, just because you want to do it doesn't mean it's in your best interest. Y'all remember back in middle school, and y'all would read the tickers depending on where you grew up, and you would see a snow day might cancel class, or somebody might pull a fire alarm and class is canceled. You might hope there's ice on the roads for a week and you don't got to go to school. Yeah, that's what you wanted to do. But it wasn't necessarily the best thing for you as a student, for your growth, nor for your development. Yes, we are still in the middle, yet hopefully on the outside end of COVID and this pandemic. But nonetheless, I would think the players are probably better off in an organization, a billion-dollar organization, where they're being tested more frequently as opposed to their homes. I would assume in off-season workouts, you're working out at least 1 hour a day in the weight room, 4 days a week. The majority of players probably not working out 4 days a week right now for 1 hour a day minimum, not to count the on the field that you do during the NFL OTAs, not to count the in-room with the playbook. So I understand the player empowerment. I'm proud of the players for banding together, but I don't necessarily know that it is smart.
Well, I would disagree with that, Emmanuel. I think it is smart just based on statistics. So if you look at player longevity, last year there was a 23% reduction in missed time injuries with a virtual offseason. So there's this thought process that we need the offseason. Players need the offseason. They need to be in April and in May and in June. And we actually saw, statistically speaking, that it was better for players physically, number one, to not have that in-person offseason. Virtually, they got everything done in the film room, but also mentally and emotionally. We're in the middle of a pandemic, so you've got COVID going on. To be able to see your family, to be able to work out on your own, at your own leisure. Yes, I get it. You don't think a lot of players may work out more than an hour a day, but I know a bunch of guys who are grinding in the offseason. They're trying to shine in the offseason. They're in the lab in the offseason. They're trying to get right. And I would say that this new offseason that the players are fighting for is good for those players who are trying to get right.
Now, Sam, no, help me make sense of this, bro, because I feel like if you're a fan, at least if you mean now an analyst, I'm not fully player anymore and really not partially. Players always fighting for something, right? You said the players are fighting now to not have to go to voluntary workouts, but there was just a collective bargaining agreement in which there were several arguments, there were disputes between owners and players the players had the rights to say, we no longer want these voluntary workouts as part of the collective bargaining agreement. So if the players conceded and said, you know what, y'all can keep the voluntary workouts, why now are they essentially banding together to go on strike against the voluntary workouts?
Well, the reason why is that this was the last point of contention when it came to negotiations. So players, owners negotiating. If you all remember last year during the negotiations, at the very last minute, Aaron Rodgers, A-Rod, the MVP, the GOAT, he flew into Florida for the meetings to come and meet with the owners. And the last conversation was this: if we're going to 17 games, we need no offseason. No offseason. And so when the conversation came, the owners really wanted the offseason. They believe in, and even coaches and strength staff and GMs, they want to see who they have. But the players said, we're adding an extra game. This is pre-COVID. No one knew about COVID. Players said, we're adding an extra game. We need some time off. And so the last conversation as it stood was, how about this? Let's follow the science. Players and owners virtually agreed to follow the science. And then all of a sudden, a month later, boom, COVID, global pandemic. Players, fans, no one's allowed to go out in public and be within 3 feet. So we had to have a virtual offseason. And all of a sudden, the science says, even though we agreed, because I hear your point, you agreed, just deal with what you agreed with. But the science says that it's better not to be in person. And so my perspective, and a bunch of players, almost all of the players so far, we've had 11 out of 33 teams say we're not coming. The majority of the players are saying, hey, let's follow the science.
Interesting right there. I'm with you, Sam. Not only do I always follow the science, facts over feelings, it has to be evidence-based. I don't want to hear it. I'm really going to tune you out. I'm walking out the barbershop. I'm not trying to hear all your rhetoric if it doesn't have a logic based in facts. That said, there's a statement, a cliche that always goes around, know your history, and people always say, why? So you don't repeat it. Well, I'm going to give you an example of why you should know your history, because you should repeat it. When I first got drafted in the NFL in 1997, let me tell y'all what we had in the offseason as workouts. Nothing. Hey, this is Marv Levy. Congratulations, you're a Buffalo Bill. We have 1 weekend of workouts, a mini camp. We're not even going to call it camp, mini camp. And see you in August. And that was it. That was 97, y'all. 98, you get that call again. It's like, hey, Marcellus, that was a good year. Not that good, but, you know, you need to work on a few things, blah, blah, blah. We're thinking of having some other workouts, but we'll let you know. 99 comes, all of a sudden you start hearing these acronyms, OTAs and stuff. You know, hey, man, what you talking about? Is this still the same game of football? And yeah, but OTAs, you know, we want you there. And I'm like, is the O optional? And they're like, no, it's organized. I'm like, that's a stupid letter to choose then. So anyway, you fast forward to today, well, I should say last year, before COVID hits, they are doing too much in terms of working these guys out. The science supports it. I'm glad COVID highlighted it. But more so than that, we are going to talk about the work-rest relationship. Think about it. We're all athletes, former athletes, whatever you want to call Sam, I don't know. We work out. And, you know, someone who's not an athlete always thinks grind. But when you're an athlete, you realize work, rest, work, rest. You got to have that balance. You got to have that relationship. So I don't love the reason why COVID obviously happening, but I'm glad there's going to be a pause in terms of the excessive load we're putting on these athletes throughout the offseason, and then a strenuous, more game in season. So to me, I'm with you, Sam.
But here's a question, fellas, and y'all two are the renowned gentlemen up here with children, and so let's speak in a language in which you all can understand. Again, I have none of my own, but I read books about the benefits of how to properly educate them. And if you do read the books about the benefits, what you learn is this.
What?
Children actually make the biggest advantages over other kids during summer school. So it's not actually during the year of school that everybody is a part of where children make the leaps and bounds mentally, emotionally, psychologically over other kids. Children gain their advantage over other children educationally during summer school, that time off, if you will, that rest period you're speaking of, Marcellus. So if we know that's a direct correlation at a young age, psychologically, emotionally, mentally, then don't you also think, at least from the mental portion of the game, because during OTAs, that's when you learn the plays, don't you think that same advantage can be accrued by the players? I understand players not wanting to go to OTAs. I never wanted to go to OTAs. If you got a new head coach, you got to go 2 weeks early. Your off season starts about February, and now you got to go back in early April. You might have a month and a half to 2 months off at the most. But I think it's actually in the better interest of the players. Yes, we can look at a 1-year sample size, Sam, I get that. But we all know that a 1-year sample size is not a great enough sample size to make a decision.
Well, I'll just put it this way. I think this will put a nail on the hammer, seal it all. It's voluntary. So all that we've negotiated, all that's been talked about this year, last year, even when Sel was hearing about this OTAs, these different acronyms, these different letters, they were always voluntary. The issue was players never volunteered to not show up. So it's one of those things where I remember in college, we played football, student athletes, right, University of Texas. The coaches would always look at us. We were student athletes. They would say, hey, you are a student first and an athlete second. So pretty much saying, you better come up and show up and win these games. That was what they were saying. And so even with these voluntary activities, yes, they're voluntary, but you better show up. And the difference now, at least what I've seen, and what's really impressed me, with 2,000 players, they're all uniting together and saying, you know what? This is voluntary. And so if we're following the science, yes, I understand summer school, but I feel like I can get right and study at home and